Lecture 9 by C.H. Spurgeon, Attention. Our subject is one which I find scarcely ever noticed in any books upon homiletics. A very curious fact, for it is a most important matter, and worthy of more than one chapter. I suppose the homiletical savants consider that their entire volumes are seasoned with this subject, and that they need not give it to us in lumps, because, like sugar in tea, it flavours the whole. That overlooked topic is how to obtain and retain the attention of our hearers. Their attention must be gained, or nothing can be done with them, and it must be retained, or we may go on word spinning, but no good will come of it. Over the head of military announcements, our English officers always place the word attention in large capitals, and we need some such word over all our sermons. We need the earnest, candid, wakeful, continued attention of those who are in the congregation. If men's minds are wandering far away, they cannot receive the truth, and it is much the same if they are inactive. Sin cannot be taken out of men as Eve was taken out of the side of Adam while they are fast asleep. They must be awake, understanding what we are saying and feeling its force, or else we may as well go to sleep too. There are preachers who care very little whether they are attended to or not, so long as they can hold on through the allotted time. It is of very small importance to them whether their people hear for eternity or hear in vain. The sooner such ministers sleep in the churchyard and preach by the verse on their gravestones, the better. Some brethren speak up the ventilator as if they sought the attention of the angels, and others look down upon their book as if they were absorbed in thought, or had themselves for an audience, and felt much honoured thereby. Why do not such brethren preach on the prairie and edify the stars? If their preaching has no reference to their hearers, they might do so with evident propriety. If a sermon be a soliloquy, the more lonely the performer, the better. To a rational preacher, and all are not rational, it must seem essential to interest all his audience, from the eldest to the youngest. We ought not to make even children inattentive. Make them inattentive, say you? Who does that? I say that most preachers do. And when children are not quiet in a meeting, it is often as much our fault as theirs. Can you not put in a little story or parable on purpose for the little ones? Can you not catch the eye of the boy in the gallery and the little girl downstairs who have begun to fidget, and smile them into order? I often talk with my eyes to the orphan boys at the foot of my pulpit. We want all eyes fixed upon us and all ears open to us. To me it is an annoyance if even a blind man does not look at me with his face. If I see anybody turning round, whispering, nodding, or looking at his watch, I judge that I am not up to the mark, and must by some means win these minds. Very seldom have I to complain, and when I do, my general plan is to complain of myself, and own that I have no right to attention unless I know how to command it. Now there are some congregations whose attention you do not readily gain. They do not care to be interested. It is useless to scold them. That will be like throwing a bush at a bird to catch it. The fact is that in most cases there is another person whom you should scold, and that is yourself. It may be their duty to attend, but it is far more your duty to make them do so. You must attract the fish to your hook, and if they do not come, you should blame the fisherman and not the fish. Compel them to stand still a while and hear what God the Lord would speak to their souls. The minister who recommended the old lady to take snuff in order to keep from dozing was very properly rebuked by her reply, that if he would put more snuff into the sermon, she would be awake enough. We must plentifully cast snuff into the sermon, or something yet more awakening. Recollect that to some of our people it is not so easy to be attentive. Many of them are not interested in the matter, and they have not felt enough of any gracious operation on their hearts to make them confess that the gospel is of any special value to them. Concerning the Saviour whom you preach, you may say to them, "Is it nothing to you? all ye that pass by? Is it nothing to you that Jesus should die? Many of them have through the week been borne down by the press of business cares. They ought to roll their burden on the Lord, but do you always do so? Do you always find it easy to escape from anxieties? Are you able to forget the sick wife and the ailing children at home? There is no doubt whatever that many come into the house of God loaded heavily with the thoughts of their daily avocations. The farmer recollects the fields that are to be ploughed or to be sown. It is a wet Sunday, and he is reflecting upon the yellow look of the young wheats. The merchant sees that dishonoured bill fluttering before his eyes, and the tradesman counts over his bad debts. I should not wonder if the colours of the ladies' ribbons and the creak of the gentlemen's boots disturb many. There are troublesome flies about, you know. Beelzebub, the god of flies, takes care that wherever there is a gospel feast, the guests should be worried with petty annoyances. Often mental mosquitoes sting the man while you are preaching to him, and he is thinking more of trifling distractions than of your discourse. Is it so very wonderful that he does? You must drive the mosquitoes away and secure your people's undistracted thoughts, turning them out of the channel in which they have been running 6 days into one suitable for the Sabbath. You must have sufficient leverage in your discourse and its subject to lift them right up from the earth to which they cleave, and to elevate them a little nearer heaven. Frequently it is very difficult for congregations to attend because of the place and the atmosphere. For instance, if the place is like this room at present, sealed against the pure air, with every window closed, they have enough to do to breathe and cannot think of anything else. When the people have inhaled over and over again the air which has been in other people's lungs, the whole machinery of life gets out of gear, and they are more likely to feel an aching head than a broken heart. The next best thing to the grace of God for a preacher is oxygen. Pray that the windows of heaven may be opened, but begin by opening the windows of your meeting house. Look at many of our country places, and I am afraid our city chapels too, and you will find that the windows are not made to open. The modern barbarous style of building gives us no more ceiling than a barn, and no more openings for ventilation than would be found in an oriental dungeon, where the tyrant expected his prisoner to die by inches. What would you think of a house where the windows could not be opened? Would any of you hire such a dwelling? Yet Gothic architecture and silly pride make many persons renounce the wholesome sash window for little holes in the ceiling or bird traps in the windows, and so places are made far less comfortable than Nebuchadnezzar's furnace was to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Provided all such chapels were properly insured, I could not pray for their preservation from fire. Even where the windows will open, they are often kept closed by the month together, and from Sunday to Sunday the impure atmosphere is unchanged. This ought not to be endured. I know some people do not notice such things, and I have heard it remarked that foxes are not killed by the stench of their own holes. But I am not a fox, and bad air makes me dull, and my hearers dull too. A gust of fresh air through the building might be to the people the next best thing to the gospel itself. At least it would put them into a fit frame of mind to receive the truth. Take trouble on weekdays to remove the hindrance arising from foul air. In my former chapel in Park Street, I mentioned to my deacons several times my opinion that the upper panes of the iron-framed windows had better be taken out, as the windows were not made to open. I mentioned this several times, and nothing came of it. But it providentially happened one Monday that somebody removed most of those panes in a masterly manner, almost as well as if they had been taken out by a glazier. There was considerable consternation and much conjecture as to who had committed the crime, and I proposed that a reward of £5 should be offered for the discovery of the offender, who, when found, should receive the amount as a present. The reward was not forthcoming, and therefore I have not felt it to be my duty to inform against the individual. I trust none of you will suspect me, for if you do, I shall have to confess that I have walked with the stick which let the oxygen into that stifling structure. Sometimes the manners of our people are inimical to attention. They are not in the habit of attending. They attend the chapel, but do not attend to the preacher. They are accustomed to look round at everyone who enters the place, and they come in at all times, sometimes with much stamping, squeaking of boots, and banging of doors. I was preaching once to a people who continually looked round, and I adopted the expedient of saying, "Now, friends, as it is so very interesting to you to know who comes in, and it disturbs me so very much for you to look round, I will, if you like, describe each one as he comes in, so that you may sit and look at me and keep up at least a show of decency." I described one gentleman who came in, who happened to be a friend, whom I could depict without offence, as a very respectable gentleman who had just taken his hat off, and so on. And after that one attempt, I found it was not necessary to describe any more, because they felt shocked at what I was doing, and I assured them that I was much more shocked that they should render it necessary for me to reduce their conduct to such an absurdity. It cured them for the time being, and I hope forever, much to their pastor's joy. We will now suppose that this is set right. You have let the foul air out of the place and reformed the manners of the people. What next? In order to get attention, the first golden rule is always to say something worth hearing. Most persons possess an instinct which leads them to desire to hear a good thing. They have a similar instinct also, which you had better take note of, namely that which prevents their seeing the good of attentively listening to mere words. It is not a severe criticism to say that there are ministers whose words stand in a very large proportion to their thoughts. In fact, their words hide their thoughts, if they have any. They pour out heaps of chaff, and perhaps there may be somewhere or other an oat or two, but it would be hard to say where. Congregations will not long attend to words, 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 and nothing else. Amongst the commandments I am not aware of one which runs thus, "Thou shalt not be verbose," but it may be comprehended under the command, "Thou shalt not steal," for it is a fraud upon your hearers to give them words instead of spiritual food. In the multitude of words there wanteth not sin, even in the best preacher. Give your hearers something which they can treasure up and remember, something likely to be useful to them. The best matter from the best of places, solid doctrine from the divine word. Give them manna fresh from the skies, not the same thing over and over again in the same form ad nauseum, like workhouse bread cut into the same shape all the year round. Give them something striking, something that a man might get up in the middle of the night to hear, and which is worth his walking 50 miles to listen to. You are quite capable of doing that. Do it, brethren. Do it continually, and you will have all the attention you can desire. Let the good matter which you give them be very clearly arranged. There is a great deal in that. It is possible to heap up a vast mass of good things, all in a muddle. Ever since the day I was sent to shop with a basket and purchased a pound of tea, a quarter of a pound of mustard, and 3 pounds of rice, and on my way home saw a pack of hounds and felt it necessary to follow them over hedge and ditch, as I always did when I was a boy, and found when I reached home that all the goods were amalgamated, tea, mustard, and rice, into one awful mess. I have understood the necessity of packing up my subjects in good stout parcels, bound round with the thread of my discourse, and this makes me keep to firstly, secondly, and thirdly, however unfashionable that method may now be. People will not drink your mustard tea, nor will they enjoy muddled-up sermons in which you cannot tell head from tail, because they have neither, but are like Mr. Bright's Skye Terrier, whose head and tail were both alike. Put the truth before men in a logical, orderly manner, so that they can easily remember it, and they will the more readily receive it. Be sure, moreover, to speak plainly, because however excellent your matter, if a man does not comprehend it, it can be of no use to him. You might as well have spoken to him in the language of Kamchatka as in your own tongue, if you use phrases that are quite out of his line, and modes of expression which are not suitable to his mind. Go up to his level if he is a poor man. Go down to his understanding if he is an educated person. You smile at my contorting the terms in that manner, but I think there is more going up in being plain to the illiterate than there is in being refined for the polite. At any rate, it is the more difficult of the two, and most like the Saviour's mode of speech. It is wise to walk in a path where your auditors can accompany you, and not to mount the high horse and ride over their heads. Our Lord and Master was the King of preachers, and yet he never was above anybody's comprehension, except so far as the grandeur and glory of his matter were concerned. His words and utterances were such that he spake like the Holy Child Jesus. Let your hearts indite a good matter, clearly arranged and plainly put, and you are pretty sure to gain the ear, and so the heart. Attend also to your manner of address. Aim at the promotion of attention. And here I should say, as a rule, do not read your sermons. There have been a few readers who have exercised great power, as, for instance, Dr. Chalmers, who could not have had a more attentive audience had he been extemporizing. But then I do not suppose that we are equal to Dr. Chalmers. Men of such eminence may read if they prefer it, but for us there is a more excellent way. The best reading I have ever heard has tasted of paper and has stuck in my throat. I have not relished it, for my digestion is not good enough to dissolve foolscap. It is better to do without the manuscript, even if you are driven to recite. It is best of all if you need neither to recite nor to read. If you must read, mind that you do it to perfection. Be the very best of readers, and you had need to be if you would secure attention. Here let me say, if you would be listened to, do not extemporize in the emphatic sense, for that is as bad as reading, or perhaps worse, unless the manuscript was written extemporaneously, without previous study. Do not go into the pulpit and say the first thing that comes to hand, for the uppermost thing with most men is mere froth. Your people need discourses which have been prayed over and laboriously prepared. People do not want raw food. It must be cooked and made ready for them. We must give out of our very souls, in the words which naturally suggest themselves, the matter which has been as thoroughly prepared by us as it possibly could have been by a sermon writer. Indeed, it should be even better prepared if we would speak well. The best method is, in my judgment, that in which the man does not extemporize the matter, but extemporizes the words. The language comes to him at the moment, but the theme has been well thought out, and like a master in Israel, he speaks of that which he knows and testifies of what he has seen. In order to get attention, make your manner as pleasing as it can possibly be. Do not, for instance, indulge in monotones. Vary your voice continually. Vary your speed as well. Dash as rapidly as a lightning flash, and anon travel forward in quiet majesty. Shift your accent, move your emphasis, and avoid sing-song. Vary the tone, use the bass sometimes, and let the thunders roll within. At other times speak as you ought to do generally, from the lips, and let your speech be conversational. Anything for a change. Human nature craves for variety, and God grants it in nature, providence, and grace. Let us have it in sermons also. I shall not, however, dwell much upon this, because preachers have been known to arouse and sustain attention by their matter alone, when their mode of speech has been very imperfect. If Richard Sibbes, the Puritan, were here this afternoon, I would guarantee him fixed attention to anything he had to say, and yet he stammered dreadfully. One of his contemporaries says he sibilated, he lisped and hissed so much. We need not look far for instances in modern pulpits, for there are too many of them. But we may remember that Moses was slow of speech, and yet every ear was attent to his words. Probably Paul also laboured under a similar infirmity, for his speech was said to be contemptible. Of this, however, we are not sure, for it was only the criticism of his enemies. Paul's power in the churches was very great, and yet he was not always able to maintain attention when his sermon was long, for at least one hearer went to sleep under him with serious result. Manner is not everything. Still, if you have gathered good matter, it is a pity to convey it meanly. A king should not ride in a dust cart. The glorious doctrines of grace should not be slovenly delivered. Right royal truths should ride in a chariot of gold. Bring forth the noblest of your milk-white steeds, and let the music sound forth melodiously from the silver trumpets as truth rides through the streets. If people do not attend, do not let them find excuses in our faulty utterance. If, however, we cannot mend in this respect, let us be the more diligent to make up for it by the richness of our matter. And on all occasions, let us do our very best. As a rule, do not make the introduction too long. It is always a pity to build a great porch to a little house. An excellent Christian woman once heard John Howe, and as he took up an hour in his preface, her observation was that the dear good man was so long a time in laying the cloth that she had lost her appetite. She did not think there would be any dinner after all. Spread your table quickly, and have done with the clatter of the knives and the plates. You may have seen a certain edition of Doddridge's Rise and Progress of Religion in the Soul, with an introductory essay by John Foster. The essay is both bigger and better than the book, and deprives Doddridge of the chance of being read. Is not this preposterous? Avoid this error in your own productions. I prefer to make the introduction of my sermon very like that of the town crier, who rings his bell and cries, oh yes, this is to give notice," merely to let the people know that he has news for them and wants them to listen. To do that, the introduction should have something striking in it. It is well to fire a startling shot as the signal gun to clear the decks for action. Do not start at the full pitch and tension of your mind, but yet in such way that all will be led to expect a good time. Do not make your exordium a pompous introduction into nothing, but a step to something better still. Be alive at the very commencement. In preaching, do not repeat yourselves. I used to hear a divine who had a habit, after he had uttered about a dozen sentences, of saying, "As I have already observed," or "I repeat what I before remarked." Well, good soul, as there was nothing particular in what he had said, the repetition only revealed the more clearly the nakedness of the land. If it was very good, and you said it forcibly, why go over it again? And if it was a feeble affair, why exhibit it a second time? Occasionally, of course, the repetition of a few sentences may be very telling. Anything may be good occasionally, and yet be very vicious as a habit. Who wonders that people do not listen the first time when they know it is all to come over again? Yet further, do not repeat the same idea over and over again in other words. Let there be something fresh in each sentence. Be not forever hammering away at the same nail. Yours is a large Bible. Permit the people to enjoy its length and breadth. And brethren, do not think it necessary or important every time you preach to give a complete summary of theology or a formal digest of doctrines after the manner of Dr. Gill. Not that I would discredit or speak a word against Dr. Gill. His method is admirable for a body of divinity or a commentary, but not suitable for preaching. I know a divine whose sermons, whenever they are printed, read like theological summaries, more fitted for a classroom than for a pulpit. They fall flat on the public ear. Our hearers do not want the bare bones of technical definition, but meat and flavour. Definitions and differences are all very well, but when they are the staple of a sermon, they remind us of the young man whose discourse was made up of various important distinctions. Upon this performance, an old deacon observed that there was one distinction which he had omitted, namely the distinction between meat and bones. If preachers do not make that distinction, all their other distinctions will not bring them much distinction. In order to maintain attention, avoid being too long. An old preacher used to say to a young man who preached an hour, "My dear friend, I do not care what else you preach about, but I wish you would always preach about 40 minutes. We ought seldom to go much beyond that, 40 minutes. Or say 3/4 of an hour. If a fellow cannot say all he has to say in that time, when will he say it? But somebody said he liked to do justice to his subject. Well, but ought he not to do justice to his people, or at least to have a little mercy upon them, and not keep them too long? The subject will not complain of you, but the people will. In some country places, in the afternoon especially, the farmers have to milk their cows, and one farmer bitterly complained to me about a young man, I think from this college. 'Sir, he ought to have given over at 4 o'clock, but he kept on till past, and there were all my cows waiting to be milked. How would he have liked it if he had been a cow?' There was a great deal of sense in that question. The Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals ought to have prosecuted that young sinner. How can farmers hear to profit when they have cows on the brain? The mother feels morally certain during that extra 10 minutes of your sermon that the baby is crying or the fire is out, and she cannot and will not give her heart to your ministrations. You are keeping her 10 minutes longer than she bargained for, and she looks upon it as a piece of injustice on your part. There is a kind of moral compact between you and your congregation that you will not weary them more than an hour and a half, and if you keep them longer, it amounts to an infraction of a treaty and a piece of practical dishonesty of which you ought not to be guilty. Brevity is a virtue within the reach of all of us. Do not let us lose the opportunity of gaining the credit which it brings. If you ask me how you may shorten your sermons, I should say study them better. Spend more time in the study that you may need less in the pulpit. We are generally longest when we have least to say. A man with a great deal of well-prepared matter will probably not exceed 40 minutes. When he has less to say, he will go on for 50 minutes. And when he has absolutely nothing, he will need an hour to say it in. Attend to these minor things and they will help to retain attention. If you want to have the attention of your people, to have it thoroughly and always, it can only be accomplished by their being led by the Spirit of God into an elevated and devout state of mind. If your people are teachable, prayerful, active, earnest, devout, they will come up to the house of God on purpose to get a blessing. They will take their seats prayerfully, asking God to speak to them through you. They will remain on the watch for every word and will not weary. They will have an appetite for the gospel, for they know the sweetness of the heavenly manna, and they will be eager to gather their appointed portions. No man will ever have a congregation to preach to which surpasses my own in this respect. Indeed, those with whom the preacher is most at home are usually the best hearers for him. It is comparatively easy for me to preach at the tabernacle. My people come on purpose to hear something, and their expectation helps to fulfill itself. If they would hear another preacher with the same expectancy, I believe they would generally be satisfied, though there are exceptions. When the preacher first settles, he cannot expect that his congregation will give him that solemn, earnest attention which those obtain who stand up like fathers among their own children, endeared to their people by 1,000 memories and esteemed for age and experience. Our whole life must be such as to add weight to our words, so that in after years we shall be able to wield the invincible eloquence of a long-sustained character, and obtain not merely the attention, but the affectionate veneration of our flock. If by our prayers and tears and labours our people become spiritually healthy, we shall not fear that we shall lose their attention. A people hungering after righteousness and a minister anxious to feed their souls will act in sweetest harmony with each other when their common theme is the word of the Lord. If you need another direction for winning attention, I should say be interested yourself, and you will interest others. There is more in those words than there seems to be, and so I will follow a custom which I just now condemned and repeat the sentence. Be interested yourself, and you will interest other people. Your subject must weigh so much upon your own mind that you dedicate all your faculties at their best to the deliverance of your soul concerning it. And then when your hearers see that the topic has engrossed you, it will by degrees engross them. Do you wonder that people do not attend to a man who does not feel he has anything important to say? Do you wonder that they do not listen with all their ears when a man does not speak with all his heart? Do you marvel that their thoughts ramble to subjects which are real to them, when they find that the preacher is wasting time over matters which he treats as if they were fictions? Romaine used to say, it was well to understand the art of preaching, but infinitely better to know the heart of preaching. And in that saying there is no little weight. The heart of preaching, the throwing of the soul into it, the earnestness which pleads as for life itself, is half the battle as to gaining attention. At the same time, you cannot hold men's minds in rapt attention by mere earnestness if you have nothing to say. People will not stand at their doors forever to hear a fellow beat a drum. They will come out to see what he is at. But when they find that it is much ado about nothing, they will slam the door and go in again, as much as to say, "You have taken us in, and we do not like it." Have something to say, and say it earnestly, and the congregation will be at your feet. It may be superfluous to remark that for the mass of our people it is well that there should be a goodly number of illustrations in our discourses. We have the example of our Lord for that, and most of the greatest preachers have abounded in similes, metaphors, allegories, and anecdotes. But beware of overdoing this business. I read the other day the diary of a German lady who has been converted from Lutheranism to our faith, and she speaks of a certain village where she lives. There is a mission station here, and young men come down to preach to us. I do not wish to find fault with these young gentlemen, but they tell us a great many very pretty little stories, and I do not think there is much else in what they say. Also, I have heard some of their little stories before, therefore they do not so much interest me as they would do if they would tell us some good doctrine out of the Scriptures. The same thing has no doubt crossed many other minds. Pretty stories are all very well, but it will never do to rely upon them as the great attraction of a sermon. Moreover, take warning concerning certain of these pretty little stories, for their day is over and gone. The poor things are worn threadbare and ought to go into the rag bag. I have heard some of them so many times that I could tell them myself, but there is no need. From stock anecdotes may both ourselves and our hearers be mercifully delivered. Ancient jests sicken us when witlings retail them as their own ideas, and anecdotes to which our great-grandfathers listened have much the same effect upon the mind. Beware of those extremely popular compilations of illustrations which are in every Sunday school teacher's hand, for nobody will thank you for repeating what everybody already knows by heart. If you tell anecdotes, let them have some degree of freshness and originality. Keep your eyes open and gather flowers from the garden and the field with your own hands. They will be far more acceptable than withered specimens borrowed from other men's bouquets, however beautiful those may once have been. Illustrate richly and aptly. but not so much with parables imported from foreign sources as with apt similes growing out of the subject itself. Do not, however, think the illustration everything. It is the window, but of what use is the light which it admits if you have nothing for the light to reveal? Garnish your dishes, but remember that the joint is the main point to consider, not the garnishing. Real instruction must be given and solid doctrine taught, or you will find your imagery pall upon your hearers, and they will pine for spiritual meat. In your sermons, cultivate what Father Taylor calls the surprise power. There is a great deal of force in that for winning attention. Do not say what everybody expected, you would say. Keep your sentences out of ruts. If you have already said, salvation is all of grace, do not always add, and not by human merit, but vary it and say, salvation is all of grace. Self-righteousness has not a corner to hide its head in. I fear I cannot recall one of Mr. Taylor's sentences so as to do it justice, but it was something like this. Some of you make no advance in the divine life because you go forward a little way and then you float back again. Just like a vessel on a tidal river which goes down with the stream just far enough to be carried back again on the return tide. So you make good progress for a while and then all of a sudden, what did he say? You hitch up in some muddy creek. Did he not also repeat us such a speech to this effect? He felt sure that if they were converted, they would walk uprightly and keep their bullocks out of their neighbour's corn. Occasional resorts to this system of surprise will keep an audience in a state of proper expectancy. I sat last year about this time on the beach at Menton by the Mediterranean Sea. The waves were very gently rising and falling, for there is little or no tide, and the wind was still. The waves crept up languidly, one after another, and I took little heed of them, though they were just at my feet. Suddenly, as if seized with a new passion, the sea sent up one far-reaching billow which drenched me thoroughly. Quiet as I had been before, you can readily conceive how quickly I was on my feet, and how speedily my daydreaming ended. I observed to a ministering brother at my side, "This shows us how to preach. To wake people up, we must astonish them with something they were not looking for." Brethren, take them at unawares. Let your thunderbolt drop out of a clear sky. When all is calm and bright, let the tempest rush up, and by contrast make its terrors all the greater. Remember, however, that nothing will avail if you go to sleep yourself while you are preaching. Is that possible? Oh, possible. It is done every Sunday. Many ministers are more than half asleep all through the sermon. Indeed, they never were awake at any time, and probably never will be, unless a cannon should be fired off near their ear. Tame phrases, hackneyed expressions, and dreary monotones make the staple of their discourses, and they wonder that the people are so drowsy. I confess I do not. A very useful help in securing attention is a pause. Pull up short every now and then, and the passengers on your coach will wake up. The miller goes to sleep while the mill wheels revolve. But if by some means or other the grinding ceases, the good man starts and cries, "What now?" On a sultry summer's day, if nothing will keep off the drowsy feeling, be very short, sing more than usual, or call on a brother or two to pray. A minister who saw that the people would sleep sat down and observed, "I saw you were all resting, and I thought I would rest too." Andrew Fuller had barely commenced a sermon when he saw the people going to sleep. He said, "Friends, friends, friends, this won't do. I have thought sometimes when you were asleep that it was my fault, but now you are asleep before I begin, and it must be your fault. Pray wake up and give me an opportunity of doing you some good." Just so. Know how to pause. Make a point of interjecting arousing parentheses of quietude. Speech is silver, but silence is golden when hearers are inattentive. Keep on with commonplace matter and monotonous tone, and you are rocking the cradle, and deeper slumbers will result. Give the cradle a jerk, and sleep will flee. I suggest again that in order to secure attention all through a discourse, we must make the people feel that they have an interest in what we are saying to them. This is in fact a most essential point, because nobody sleeps while he expects to hear something to his advantage. I have heard of some very strange things, but I never did hear of a person going to sleep while a will was being read in which he expected a legacy. Neither have I heard of a prisoner going to sleep while the judge was summing up and his life was hanging in jeopardy. Self-interest quickens attention. Preach upon practical themes, pressing, present, personal matters, and you will secure an earnest hearing. It will be well to prevent attendants traversing the aisles to meddle with gas or candles, or to distribute plates for collections, or to open windows. Deacons and sextons trotting over the place are a torture never to be patiently endured, and should be kindly but decidedly requested to suspend their perambulations. Late attendance also needs remedying, and our gentlest reasonings and expostulations must be brought to bear upon it. I feel sure that the devil has a hand in many disturbances in the congregation which jar upon our nerves and distract our thoughts. The banging of a pew door, the sharp fall of a stick on the floor, or the cry of a child are all convenient means in the hands of the evil one for hindering us in our work. We may therefore very justifiably beg our people to preserve our usefulness from this class of assaults. I gave you a golden rule for securing attention at the commencement, namely, always say something worth hearing. I will now give you a diamond rule and conclude. Be yourself clothed with the Spirit of God, and then no question about attention or non-attention will arise. Come fresh from the closet and from communion with God to speak to men for God with all your heart and soul, and you must have power over them. You have golden chains in your mouth which will hold them fast. When God speaks, men must listen. And though he may speak through a poor, feeble man like themselves, the majesty of the truth will compel them to regard his voice. Supernatural power must be your reliance. We say to you, perfect yourselves in oratory. Cultivate all the fields of knowledge. Make your sermon mentally and rhetorically all it ought to be. You ought to do no less in such a service. But at the same time, remember, it is not by might nor by power that men are regenerated or sanctified, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. Are you not conscious sometimes of being clad with zeal as with a cloak, and filled to the full with the Spirit of God? At such times you have had a hearing people, and ere long a believing people. But if you are not thus endowed with power from on high, you are to them no more than a musician who plays upon a goodly instrument or sings a sweet song with a clear voice, reaching the ear but not the heart. If you do not touch the heart, you will soon weary the ear. Clothe yourself then with the power of the Spirit of God, and preach to men as those who must soon give an account, and who desire that their account may not be painful to their people and grievous to themselves, but that it may be to the glory of God. Brethren, may the Lord be with you, while you go forth in his name and cry, He that hath ears to hear, let him hear. Amen. C.H. Spurgeon's Lectures to My Students, Book 2, Lecture 5, Open Air Preaching, Remarks thereon. I fear that in some of our less enlightened country churches there are conservative individuals who almost believe that to preach anywhere except in the chapel would be a shocking innovation, a sure token of heretical tendencies, and a mark of zeal without knowledge. Any young brother who studies his comfort among them must not suggest anything so irregular as a sermon outside the walls of their Zion. In the olden times, we are told, wisdom crieth without, she uttereth her voice in the streets, she crieth in the chief places of concourse, in the openings of the gates. But the wise men of orthodoxy would have wisdom gagged, except beneath the roof of a licensed building. These people believe in a New Testament which says, "Go out into the highways and hedges and compel them to come in," and yet they dislike a literal obedience to the command. Do they imagine that a special blessing results from sitting upon a particular deal board with a piece of straight-up panelling at their back, an invention of discomfort which ought long ago to have made people prefer to worship outside on the green grass? Do they suppose that grace rebounds from sounding boards, or can be beaten out of pulpit cushions in the same fashion as the dust? Are they enamoured of the bad air and the stifling stuffiness which in some of our meeting houses make them almost as loathsome to the nose and to the lungs as the mass houses of papists with their cheap and nasty incense? To reply to these objectors is a task for which we have no heart. We prefer foemen worthy of the steel we use upon them, but these are scarcely worth a passing remark. One smiles at their prejudice, but we may yet have to weep over it, if it be allowed to stand in the way of usefulness. No sort of defence is needed for preaching out of doors, but it would need very potent arguments to prove that a man had done his duty who has never preached beyond the walls of his meeting house. A defence is required rather for services within buildings than for worship outside of them. Apologies are certainly wanted for architects who pile up brick and stone into the skies when there is so much need for preaching rooms among poor sinners down below. Defence is greatly needed for forests of stone pillars which prevent the preacher's being seen and his voice from being heard, for high-pitched Gothic roofs in which all sound is lost and men are killed by being compelled to shout till they burst their blood vessels, and also for the wilful creation of echoes by exposing hard, sound-refracting surfaces to satisfy the demands of art, to the total overlooking of the comfort of both audience and speaker. Surely also some decent excuse is badly wanted for those childish people who must needs waste money in placing hobgoblins and monsters on the outside of their preaching houses, and must have other ridiculous pieces of popery stuck up both inside and outside, to deface rather than to adorn their churches and chapels. But no defence whatever is wanted for using the Heavenly Father's vast audience chamber, which is in every way so well fitted for the proclamation of a gospel so free, so full, so expansive, so sublime. The usual holding of religious assemblies under cover may be excused in England because our climate is so execrably bad, but it were well to cease from such use when the weather is fine and fixed and space and quiet can be obtained. We are not like the people of Palestine who can foresee their weather and are not every hour in danger of a shower. But if we meet with sub-Jove, as the Latins say, we must expect the Jove of the hour to be Jupiter Pluvius. We can always have a deluge if we do not wish for it, but if we fix a service out of doors for next Sunday morning, we have no guarantee that we shall not all be drenched to the skin. It is true that some notable sermons have been preached in the rain, but as a general rule the ardour of our auditors is hardly so great as to endure much damping. Besides, the cold of our winters is too intense for services out of doors all the year round, though in Scotland I have heard of sermons amid the sleet, and John Nelson writes of speaking to a crowd too large to get into the house, though it was dark and snowed. Such things may be done now and then, but exceptions only prove the rule. It is fair also to admit that when people will come within walls, if the house be so commodious that a man could not readily make more persons hear, and if it be always full, there can be no need to go out of doors to preach to fewer than there would be indoors, For all things considered, a comfortable seat, screened from the weather and shut in from noise and intrusion, is helpful to a man's hearing the gospel with solemnity and quiet thought. A well-ventilated, well-managed building is an advantage if the crowds can be accommodated and can be induced to come. But these conditions are very rarely met, and therefore my voice is for the fields. The great benefit of open-air preaching is that we get so many newcomers to hear the gospel who otherwise would never hear it. The gospel command is, "Go ye into all the world, and preach the gospel to every creature." But it is so little obeyed that one would imagine that it ran thus: "Go into your own place of worship and preach the gospel to the few creatures who will come inside. Go ye into the highways and hedges, and compel them to come in," albeit it constitutes part of a parable, is worthy to be taken very literally, and in so doing its meaning will be best carried out. We ought actually to go into the streets and lanes and highways, for there are lurkers in the hedges, tramps on the highway, street walkers and lane hunters, whom we shall never reach unless we pursue them into their own domains. Sportsmen must not stop at home and wait for the birds to come and be shot at. Neither must fishermen throw their nets inside their boats and hope to take many fish. Traders go to the markets. They follow their customers and go out after business if it will not come to them, and so must we. Some of our brethren are prosing on and on to empty pews and musty hassocks, while they might be conferring lasting benefit upon hundreds by quitting the old walls for a while and seeking living stones for Jesus. Let them come out of Rehoboth and find room at the street corner. Let them leave Salem and seek the peace of neglected souls. Let them dream no longer at Bethel, but make an open space to be none other than the house of God. Let them come down from Mount Zion and up from Enon, and even away from Trinity and St. Agnes and St. Michael and all angels, and St. Margaret Pattens and St. Vedast and St. Ethelburger and all the rest of them, and try to find new saints among the sinners who are perishing for lack of knowledge. I've known street preaching in London remarkably blessed to persons whose character and condition would quite preclude their having been found in a place of worship. I know, for instance, a Jewish friend who, on coming from Poland, understood nothing whatever of the English language. In going about the streets on the Sunday, he noticed the numerous groups listening to earnest speakers. He had never seen such a thing in his own country, where the Russian police would be alarmed if groups were seen in conversation, and he was therefore all the more interested. As he acquired a little English, he became more and more constant in his attendance upon street speakers. Indeed, it was very much with the view of learning the language that he listened at the first. I am afraid that the English which he acquired was not of the very best, which judgment I form as much from what I have heard of open-air oratory as from having listened to our Jewish friend himself, whose theology is better than his English. However, that Israelite indeed has always reason to commend the street preachers. How many other strangers and foreigners may, by the same instrumentality, have become fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God, we cannot tell. Romanists also are met with in this manner more frequently than some would suppose. It is seldom prudent to publish cases of conversion among papists, but my own observation leads me to believe that they are far more common than they were 10 years ago, and the gracious work is frequently commenced by what is heard of the gospel at our street corners. Infidels also are constantly yielding to the word of the Lord, thus brought home to them. The street evangelist, moreover, wins attention from those eccentric people whose religion can neither be described nor imagined. Such people hate the very sight of our churches and meeting houses, but will stand in a crowd to hear what is said, and are often most impressed when they affect the greatest contempt. Besides, there are numbers of persons in great cities who have not fit clothes to worship in, according to the current idea of what clothes ought to be. and not a few whose persons as well as their garments are so filthy, so odorous, so unapproachable, that the greatest philanthropist and the most levelling democrat might desire to have a little space between himself and their lively individualities. There are others who, whatever raiment they wear, would not go into a chapel upon any consideration, for they consider it to be a sort of punishment to attend divine service. Possibly they remember the dull Sundays of their childhood, and the dreary sermons they have heard when, for a few times, they have entered a church. But it is certain that they look upon persons who attend places of worship as getting off the punishment they ought to endure in the next world by suffering it in this world instead. The Sunday newspaper, the pipe and the pot have more charms for them than all the preachments of bishops and parsons, whether of church or dissent. The open-air evangelist frequently picks up these members of the no-church party, and in so doing he often finds some of the richest gems that will at last adorn the Redeemer's crown, jewels which by reason of their roughness are apt to be unnoticed by a more fastidious class of soul-winners. Jonah in the streets of Nineveh was heard by multitudes who would never have known of his existence if he had hired a hall. John the Baptist by the Jordan awakened an interest which would never have been aroused had he kept to the synagogue. And those who went from city to city proclaiming everywhere the word of the Lord Jesus would never have turned the world upside down if they had felt it needful to confine themselves to iron rooms, adorned with the orthodox announcement, "The gospel of the grace of God will, D.V., be preached here next Lord's Day evening." I'm quite sure, too, that if we could persuade our friends in the country to come out a good many times in the year and hold a service in a meadow, or in a shady grove, or on the hillside, or in a garden, or on a common, it would be all the better for the usual hearers. The mere novelty of the place would freshen their interest and wake them up. The slight change of scene would have a wonderful effect upon the more somnolent. See how mechanically they move into their usual place of worship, and how mechanically they go out again. They fall into their seats as if at last they had found a resting place. They rise to sing with an amazing effort, and they drop down before you have time for a doxology at the close of the hymn, because they did not notice it was coming. What logs some regular hearers are! Many of them are asleep with their eyes open. After sitting a certain number of years in the same old spot, where the pews, pulpit, galleries, and all things else are always the same, except that they get a little dirtier and dingier every week, where everybody occupies the same position forever and forevermore, and the minister's face, voice, tone are much the same from January to December, you get to feel the holy quiet of the scene and listen to what is going on as though it were addressed to the dull, cold ear of death. As a miller hears his wheels as though he did not hear them, or a stoker scarcely notices the clatter of his engine after enduring it for a little time, or as a dweller in London never notices the ceaseless grind of the traffic, so do many members of our congregations become insensible to the most earnest addresses, and accept them as a matter of course. The preaching and the rest of it get to be so usual that they might as well not be at all. Hence a change of place might be useful. It might prevent monotony, shake up indifference, suggest thought, and in 1,000 ways promote attention and give new hope of doing good. A great fire which should burn some of our chapels to the ground might not be the greatest calamity which has ever occurred, if it only aroused some of those rivals of the 7 sleepers of Ephesus, who will never be moved so long as the old house and the old pews hold together. Besides, the fresh air and plenty of it is a grand thing for every mortal man, woman and child. I preached in Scotland twice on a Sabbath day at Blairmore, on a little height by the side of the sea, and after discoursing with all my might to large congregations, to be counted by thousands, I did not feel one half so much exhausted as I often am when addressing a few hundreds in some horrible black hole of Calcutta called a chapel. I trace my freshness and freedom from lassitude at Blairmore to the fact that the windows could not be shut down by persons afraid of draughts, and that the roof was as high as the heavens are above the earth. My conviction is that a man could preach 3 or 4 times on a Sabbath out of doors, with less fatigue than would be occasioned by one discourse delivered in an impure atmosphere, heated and poisoned by human breath, and carefully preserved from every refreshing infusion of natural air. Tents are bad, unutterably bad, far worse than the worst buildings. I think a tent is the most objectionable covering for a preaching place that was ever invented. I am glad to see tents used in London, for the very worst place is better than none, and because they can easily be moved from place to place and are not very expensive. But still, if I had my choice between having nothing at all and having a tent, I should prefer the open air by far. Under canvas the voice is deadened and the labour of speaking greatly increased. The material acts as a wet blanket to the voice, kills its resonance, and prevents its travelling. With fearful exertion in the sweltering air generated in a tent, you will be more likely to be killed than to be heard. You must have noticed even at our college gatherings, when we number only some 200, how difficult it is to hear at the end of a tent, even when the sides are open and the air is pure. Perhaps you may on that occasion attribute this fact in some degree to a want of attentiveness and quietness on the part of that somewhat jubilant congregation. But still, even when prayer is offered and all is hushed, I have observed a great want of travelling power in the best voice beneath a marquee. If you are going to preach in the open air in the country, you will perhaps have your choice of a spot wherein to preach. If not, of course, you must have what you can get, and you must in faith accept it as the very best. Hobson's choice of that or none makes the matter simple and saves a deal of debate. Do not be very squeamish. If there should happen to be an available meadow hard by your chapel, select it because it will be very convenient to turn into the meeting house should the weather prove unsuitable, or if you wish to hold a prayer meeting or an after meeting at the close of your address. It is well to preach before your regular services on a spot near your place of worship, so as to march the crowd right into the building before they know what they are about. Half an hour's out-of-door speaking and singing before your ordinary hour of assembly will often fill an empty house. At the same time, do not always adhere to near and handy spots, but choose a locality for the very opposite reason, because it is far away from any place of worship, and altogether neglected. Hang up the lamps wherever there is a dark corner. The darker, the more need of light. Paradise Row and Pleasant Place are generally the least paradisaical and the most unpleasant. Thither let your steps be turned. Let the dwellers in the valley of the shadow of death perceive that light has sprung up for them. I have somewhere met with the recommendation always to preach with a wall behind you, but against that I respectfully enter my caveat. Have a care of what may be on the other side of the wall. One evangelist received a can of scalding water from over a wall with the kindly remark, "There's soup for Protestants," and another was favoured with most unsavoury bespatterings from a vessel emptied from above. Gideon Ouseley began to preach in Ross Common with his back against the gable of a tobacco factory, in which there was a window with a wooden door, through which goods were hoisted into the loft. Would you be surprised to learn that the window suddenly opened and that from it descended a pailful of tobacco water, an acrid fluid most painful to the eyes? The preacher in after years knew better than to put himself in such a tempting position. Let his experience instruct you. If I had my choice of a pitch for preaching, I should prefer to front a rising ground or an open spot bounded at some little distance by a wall. Of course there must be sufficient space to allow of the congregation assembling between the pulpit and the bounding object in front, but I like to see an end and not to shout into boundless space. I do not know a prettier site for a sermon than that which I occupied in my friend Mr. Duncan's grounds at Benmore. It was a level sweep of lawn backed by rising terraces covered with fir trees. The people could either occupy seats below or drop down upon the grassy banks as best comported with their comfort, and thus I had part of my congregation in rising galleries above me, and the rest in the area around me. My voice readily ascended, and I conceived that if the people had been seated up the hill for half a mile, they would have been able to hear me with ease. I should suppose that Wesley's favourite spot at Gwenap Pit must be somewhat after the same order. Amphitheatres and hillsides are always favourite spots with preachers in the fields, and their advantages will be at once evident to you. My friend Mr. Abraham once produced for me a grand cathedral in Oxfordshire. The remains of it are still called Spurgeon's Tabernacle, and may be seen near Minster Lavelle in the form of a quadrilateral of oaks. Originally it was the beau ideal of a preaching place, for it was a cleared spot in the thick forest of Wychwood, and was reached by roads cut through the dense underwood. I shall never forget those alleys green, and the verdant walls which shut them in. When you reached the inner temple, it consisted of a large square, out of which the underwood and smaller trees had been cut away, while a sufficient number of young oaks had been left to rise to a considerable height, and then overshadow us with their branches. Here was a truly magnificent cathedral, with pillars and arches, a temple not made with hands, of which we might truly say, Father, thy hand hath reared these venerable columns, thou didst weave this verdant roof. I have never, either at home or on the continent, seen architecture which could rival my cathedral. Lo, we heard of it at Ephrata, we found it in the fields of the wood. The blue sky was visible through our clerestory, and from the great window at the further end the sun smiled upon us toward evening. O sirs, it was grand indeed to worship thus beneath the vaulted firmament, beyond the sound of city hum, where all around ministered to quiet fellowship with God. That spot is now cleared, and the place of our assembly has been selected at a little distance from it. It is of much the same character, only that my boundary walls of forest growth have disappeared to give place to an open expanse of ploughed fields. Only the pillars and the roof of my temple remain, but I am still glad, like the Druids, to worship among the oak trees. This year a dove had built her nest just above my head, and she continued flying to and fro to feed her young while the sermon proceeded. Why not? Where should she be more at home than where the Lord of Love and Prince of Peace was adored? It is true my arched cathedral is not waterproof, and other showers besides those of grace will descend upon the congregation, but this has its advantages, for it makes us the more grateful when the day is propitious, and the very precariousness of the weather excites a large amount of earnest prayer. I once preached a sermon in the open air in haying time during a violent storm of rain. The text was, "He shall come down like rain upon the mown grass, as showers that water the earth." And surely we had the blessing as well as the inconvenience. I was sufficiently wet, and my congregation must have been drenched, but they stood it out, and I never heard that anybody was the worse in health, though I thank God I have heard of souls brought to Jesus under that discourse. Once in a while, and under strong excitement, such things do no one any harm, but we are not to expect miracles, nor wantonly venture upon a course of procedure which might kill the sickly and lay the foundations of disease in the strong. I remember well preaching between Cheddar cliffs. What a noble position! What beauty and sublimity! But there was great danger from falling pieces of stone, moved by the people who sat upon the higher portions of the cliff, and hence I would not choose the spot again. We must studiously avoid positions where serious accident might be possible. An injured head qualifies no one for enjoying the beauties of nature or the consolations of grace. Concluding a discourse in that place, I called upon those mighty rocks to bear witness that I had preached the gospel to the people, and to be a testimony against them at the last great day if they rejected the message. Only the other day I heard of a person to whom that appeal was made useful by the Holy Spirit. Look well to the ground you select, that it is not swampy. I never like to see a man slip up to his knees in mire while I'm preaching. Rushy places are often so smooth and green that we select them without noting that they are apt to be muddy and to give our hearers wet feet. Always inconvenience yourself rather than your audience. Your master would have done so. Even in the streets of London, a concern for the convenience of your hearers is one of the things which conciliates a crowd more than anything. Avoid as your worst enemy the neighbourhood of the Normandy poplar. These trees cause a perpetual hissing and rustling sound, almost like the noise of the sea. Every leaf of certain kinds of poplar is in perpetual motion like the tongue of talkative. The noise may not seem very loud, but it will drown the best of voices. The sound of a going in the tops of the mulberry trees is all very well, but keep clear of the noise of poplars and some other trees, or you will suffer for it. I have had painful experience of this misery. The old serpent himself seemed to hiss at me out of those unquiet boughs. Practised preachers do not care to have the sun directly in their faces if they can help it. Neither do they wish their hearers to be distressed in like manner, and therefore they take this item into consideration when arranging for a service. In London we do not see that luminary often enough to be much concerned upon this point. Do not try to preach against the wind, for it is an idle attempt. You may hurl your voice a short distance by an amazing effort, but you cannot be well heard even by the few. I do not often advise you to consider which way the wind blows, but on this occasion I urge you to do it, or you will labour in vain. Preach so that the wind carries your voice towards the people and does not blow it down your throat, or you will have to eat your own words. There is no telling how far a man may be heard with the wind. In certain atmospheres and climates, as for instance in that of Palestine, persons might be heard for several miles, and single sentences of well-known speech may in England be recognized a long way off. But I should gravely doubt a man if he asserted that he understood a new sentence beyond the distance of a mile. Whitfield is reported to have been heard a mile, and I have been myself assured that I was heard for that distance, but I am somewhat sceptical. Half a mile is surely enough, even with the wind, but you must make sure of that to be heard at all. In the country it ought to be easy to find a fit place for preaching. One of the earliest things that a minister should do when he leaves college and settles in a country town or village is to begin open-air speaking. He will generally have no difficulty as to the position. The land is before him, and he may choose according to his own sweet will. The market cross will be a good beginning. Then the head of a court crowded with the poor, and next the favourite corner of the idlers of the parish. Cheap Jack's stand will make a capital pulpit on Sunday night during the village fair, and a waggon will serve well on the green, or in a field at a little distance, during the weekday evenings of the rustic festival. A capital place for an al fresco discourse is the green where the old elm trees, felled long ago, are still lying in reserve, as if they were meant to be seats for your congregation. So also is the burial ground of the meeting house, where the rude forefathers of the hamlet sleep. Consecrate it to the living, and let the people enjoy meditations among the tombs. Make no excuses then, but get to work at once. In London or any other large town, it is a great thing to find a vacant spot where you can obtain a right to hold services at your pleasure. If you can discover a piece of ground which is not yet built over, and if you can obtain the use of it from the owner till he covers it, it will be a great acquisition and worth a slight expense in fencing, for you are then king of the castle, and disturbers will be trespassers. I suppose that such a spot is not often obtainable, especially by persons who have no money, but it is worth thinking about. It is a great gain when your place of worship has even a small outside space, like that at Surrey Chapel, or upon the tabernacle steps, for here you are beyond the interference of the police or drunken men. If we have none of these, we must find street corners, triangles, quiet nooks, and wide spaces wherein to proclaim the gospel. Years ago I preached to enormous assemblies in King Edward's Road, Hackney, which was then open fields, but now not a spare yard remains. On those occasions the rush was perilous to life and limb, and there seemed no limit to the throngs. Half the number would have been safer. That open space has vanished, and it is the same with fields at Brixton, where in years gone by it was delightful to see the assembled crowds listening to the word. Burdened with the rare trouble of drawing too many together, I have been compelled to abstain from these exercises in London, but not from any lessened sense of their importance. With the tabernacle always full, I have as large a congregation as I desire at home, and therefore do not preach outside except in the country. But for those ministers whose area under cover is but small, and whose congregations are thin, the open air is the remedy, whether in London or in the provinces. In raising a new interest and in mission operations, out-of-door services are a main agency. Get the people to listen outside that they may, by and by, worship inside. You want no pulpit, a chair will do, or the curb of the road. The less formality, the better. And if you begin by merely talking to the 2 or 3 around you, and make no pretence of sermonizing, you will do well. More good may be done by personal talk to 1 than by a rhetorical address to 50. Do not purposely interfere with the thoroughfare, but if the crowd should accumulate, do not hasten away in sheer fright. The policeman will let you know soon enough. You are most wanted, however, where you will be in no danger of impeding passers-by, but far more likely to be in danger yourself. I refer to those central courts and blind alleys in our great cities which lie out of the route of decency, and are known to nobody but the police, and to them principally through bruises and wounds. Talk of discovering the interior of Africa, we need explorers for Frying Pan Alley and Emerald Island Court. The Arctic regions are well nigh as accessible as Dobinson's Rents and Jack Ketch's Warren. Heroes of the Cross, here is a field for you more glorious than the Cid ever beheld, when with his brave right arm he smote the Paynim hosts. Who will bring me into the strong city? Who will lead me into Edom? Who will enable us to win these slums and dens for Jesus? Who can do it but the Lord? Soldiers of Christ who venture into these regions must expect a revival of the practices of the good old times as far as brickbats are concerned, and I have known a flower pot fall accidentally from an upper window in a remarkably slanting direction. Still, if we are born to be drowned, we shall not be killed by flower pots. Under such treatment, it may be refreshing to read what Christopher Hopper wrote under similar conditions more than 100 years ago. I did not much regard a little dirt, a few rotten eggs, the sound of a cow's horn, the noise of bells, or a few snowballs in their season, but sometimes I was saluted with blows, stones, brickbats, and bludgeons, These I did not well like. They were not pleasing to flesh and blood. I sometimes lost a little skin, and once a little blood, which was drawn from my forehead with a sharp stone. I wore a patch for a few days and was not ashamed. I gloried in the cross, and when my small sufferings abounded for the sake of Christ, my comfort abounded much more. I never was more happy in my own soul or blessed in my labours. I am somewhat pleased when I occasionally hear of a brother's being locked up by the police, for it does him good, and it does the people good also. It is a fine sight to see the minister of the gospel marched off by the servant of the law. It excites sympathy for him, and the next step is sympathy for his message. Many who felt no interest in him before are eager to hear him when he is ordered to leave off, and still more so when he is taken to the station. The vilest of mankind respect a man who gets into trouble in order to do them good. And if they see unfair opposition excited, they grow quite zealous in the man's defence. I am persuaded that the more of open-air preaching there is in London, the better. If it should become a nuisance to some, it will be a blessing to others, if properly conducted. If it be the gospel which is spoken, and if the spirit of the preacher be one of love and truth, the results cannot be doubted. The bread cast upon the waters must be found again after many days. The gospel must, however, be preached in a manner worth the hearing, for mere noise-making is an evil rather than a benefit. I know a family almost driven out of their senses by the hideous shouting of monotonous exhortations, and the howling of "safe in the arms of Jesus" near their door every Sabbath afternoon by the year together. They are zealous Christians, and would willingly help their tormentors if they saw the slightest probability of usefulness from the violent bawling. But as they seldom see a hearer, and do not think that what is spoken would do any good if it were heard, they complain that they are compelled to lose their few hours of quiet, because two good men think it their duty to perform a noisy but perfectly useless service. I once saw a man preaching with no hearer but a dog, which sat upon its tail and looked up very reverently while its master orated. There were no people at the windows, nor passing by, but the brother and his dog were at their post, whether the people would hear or whether they would forbear. Once also I passed an earnest declaimer, whose hat was on the ground before him, filled with papers, and there was not even a dog for an audience, nor any one within hearing, yet did he waste his sweetness on the desert air. I hope it relieved his own mind. Really it must be viewed as an essential part of a sermon that somebody should hear it. It cannot be a great benefit to the world to have sermons preached in vacuo. As to style in preaching out of doors, it should certainly be very different from much of that which prevails within, and perhaps if a speaker were to acquire a style fully adapted to a street audience, he would be wise to bring it indoors with him. A great deal of sermonizing may be defined as saying nothing at extreme length. But out of doors, verbosity is not admired. You must say something and have done with it, and go on to say something more, or your hearers will let you know. "Now then," cries a street critic, "let us have it, old fellow." Or else the observation is made, "Now then, pitch it out. You'd better go home and learn your lesson." "Cut it short, old boy," is a very common admonition, and I wish the presenters of this advice gratis could let it be heard inside Ebenezer and Zor and some other places sacred to long-winded orations. Where these outspoken criticisms are not employed, the hearers rebuke prosiness by quietly walking away. Very unpleasant this, to find your congregation dispersing, but a very plain intimation that your ideas are also much dispersed. In the street a man must keep himself alive and use many illustrations and anecdotes and sprinkle a quaint remark here and there. To dwell long on a point will never do. Reasoning must be brief, clear, and soon done with. The discourse must not be laboured or involved, neither must the second head depend upon the first, for the audience is a changing one, and each point must be complete in itself. The chain of thought must be taken to pieces, and each link melted down and turned into bullets. You will not need so much Saladin's sabre to cut through a muslin handkerchief as Coeur de Lion's battle-axe to break a bar of iron. Come to the point at once, and come there with all your might. Short sentences of words and short passages of thought are needed for out of doors. Long paragraphs and long arguments had better be reserved for other occasions. In quiet country crowds there is much force in an eloquent silence, now and then interjected. It gives people time to breathe and also to reflect. Do not, however, attempt this in a London street. You must go ahead, or someone else may run off with your congregation. In a regular field sermon, pauses are very effective, and are useful in several ways, both to speaker and listeners, but to a passing company who are not inclined for anything like worship, quick, short, sharp address is most adapted. In the streets a man must from beginning to end be intense, and for that very reason he must be condensed and concentrated in his thought and utterance. It would never do to begin by saying, "My text, dear friends, is a passage from the inspired word, containing doctrines of the utmost importance and bringing before us in the clearest manner the most valuable practical instruction. I invite your careful attention and the exercise of your most candid judgment, while we consider it under various aspects and place it in different lights, in order that we may be able to perceive its position in the analogy of the faith. In its exegesis we shall find an arena for the cultured intellect and the refined sensibilities. As the purling brook meanders among the meads and fertilizes the pastures, so a stream of sacred truth flows through the remarkable words which now lie before us. It will be well for us to divert the crystal current to the reservoir of our meditation, that we may quaff the cup of wisdom with the lips of satisfaction. There, gentlemen, is not that rather above the average of word-spinning? And is not the art very generally in vogue in these days? If you go out to the obelisk in Blackfriars Road and talk in that fashion, you will be saluted with, "Go on, old buffer, or ain't he fine, my eye?" A very vulgar youth will cry, "What a mouth for a tater!" And another will shout in a tone of mock solemnity, "Amen!" If you give them chaff, they will cheerfully return it into your own bosom. Good measure, pressed down and running over, will they mete out to you. Shams and shows will have no mercy from a street gathering. But have something to say. Look them in the face. Say what you mean. Put it plainly, boldly, earnestly, courteously, and they will hear you. Never speak against time, or for the sake of hearing your own voice, or you will obtain some information about your personal appearance or manner of oratory, which will probably be more true than pleasing. "Crikey," says one, "wouldn't he do for an undertaker? He'd make 'em weep." This was a compliment